I would say, of the truth movement. So he's kind of started a really kind of new phenomenon, Firefighters for 9/11 Truth. And, you know, bear in mind that firefighters fight fires in buildings, common sense. They have a manual that's dedicated in detail to exploring all of this information. What if a building collapses? What about steel reinforced concrete structures? If buildings just fell, firefighters probably wouldn't be fighting fires in buildings. They'd be showing up saying, well, maybe it might collapse. All this stuff was thoroughly investigated and analyzed and put together with science and the help of experts in manuals. And what he found is going to contribute so much to what Gage had found out in an architectural sense, is exactly what he found out. They already did that. They had already looked at these things. And so what Gage is finding out is really complementing what you're about to learn about. He's a 13-year firefighter in Seattle, 20 years in emergency services, 350, I believe, and counting firefighters so far on board. Maybe I forgot what the numbers are. Let's go ahead and give a round of applause for
there it goes. Thank you so much for showing up. And as Jonathan said, my name is Eric Boyer. I want to be clear up front. I do not work for the Fire Department of New York. I work for Seattle Fire Department. I am not a fire investigator. I am not an expert in fire investigation. But I had my awakening about a year ago, and it was a major event in my life. And that's kind of what I'm going to cover in the first part of this show. In the first, just to let you guys know, as a website, we've only been up online for about 6 months, a little over 6 months now. We've had a lot of challenges with our petition. We had a couple hundred firefighters initially. We had some technical problems that was kind of sabotaged, and we lost a lot of those. So we officially have 50 confirmed firefighters. We've got about another 50 that aren't confirmed, that we're trying to confirm, and growing from there. So this is the first thing I want to start with. This is the big thing. One of the reasons I think we're in the problem we're in today with 9/11 and the way people are reacting is we're willing to believe authority. And just like myself, some people will look at me as an authority figure. I'm not. I'm just an average citizen. I'm not here representing the Seattle Fire Department. I am a firefighter. There's a lot of firefighters that believe in what we're doing. But this is one of my favorite quotes, is read everything, listen to everybody, don't trust anything unless you can prove it with your own research. So with that being said, I'm going to kind of go over the outline here of what we're going to cover today. And it's Fire Service and Fire Science 101 to 301. It's kind of my joke. I just want to give you guys the background of what the fire service is like. A lot of people ask me all the time, why aren't more firefighters speaking out? I'm going to cover that. I'm actually going to share with you towards the end of this presentation a pretty major debate going on right now in firehouse forums. And for those of you who don't know what that is, there's a magazine called Firehouse Magazine, and it's the largest fire magazine in the world. It's not quite the most technical. There's another one called Fire Engineering that's a lot more technical, but I kind of joke Firehouse is more like the people magazine of the fire service. It shows a lot of pretty pictures and a lot of stories and stuff like that, but they have a lot more people in there. Well, there's some fire investigators in that forum. They started asking who I was, what I was about, and I'll share with you the actual what they've said. I challenged one of the investigators that was there. He's on the NFPA, and I'm going to go over what the NFPA is. He was there on 9/11. He watched the towers come down, and he will not respond to my questions. He does nothing but make fun of it. I'll share with you. So I'm going to kind of go over why firefighters are not speaking out. It's an emotional thing. So the way I'm going to, and then I'm going to go over my story and the story behind it, kind of how I was one of those people who aggressively fought the truth. I just didn't want to hear it. I made fun of people who did it. I told my own lieutenant for years had been telling me this doesn't look right, and I told him he was crazy if he thought, you know, anyone other than the terrorists did this. So that's why a lot of people in my department are listening to me now, because I was the one on the other side so aggressively speaking out. Then we're going to go over NIST, NFPA, and the evidence, the destruction of evidence, ground zero atmosphere and the workers, what's happened to them since 9/11, the radios, and I don't know how many people have heard of those, but there's some major problems with radios for the firefighters, and actually the ones who in Tower 1 over 100 of them ended up dying. They didn't need to. It was because of communication problems. And then why aren't more firefighters speaking out, like I talked about? And then what can you do? So that's kind of the outline. And we'll just get started here. The first part's kind of fun, and it's just going to be fire service and fire science. So for those of you who don't know, how many people in here know the difference between a fire truck and a fire engine? We got one or two, okay. We got a couple of firefighters here, so they know the difference. For them, I'm going to show you guys what the difference is. So this is a fire truck. It has the ladder up top. It has all the tools. It's basically a toolbox. And then we call it super bad on our truck. I'm on a truck, if you can guess already. And then there's a fire engine, and that's what carries the hose and water. They have one small ladder, typically, or there's actually a couple small ladders. They basically don't have very many tools. It's mostly hose and water. So we call them the hose monkeys. There's a huge rivalry in the fire service between truckies and enginemen. And New York has it. Every major department I know of has it. And so there's a lot of ribbing that goes on. Some of it's joking, some of it's not. So we have this culture of always bantering. And so that's kind of where I think we have some of the problems we do today. But it's a good thing, but it causes some problems. And then this is what some people think of the firehouse. And this is the kind of stuff that we tend to do on a semi-regular basis. We're not serious all the time. This is just an idea. One of our favorite pranks. Buzzer sound. There's no sound. There's no chain on a chainsaw. And so, getting woken up from a nap kind of rudely with the chainsaw going is not fun. How do we get the sound going on this? Is that it? I don't remember putting that on there. Because a lot of the stuff I'm going to show you you have to hear the audio too. That's a good idea. Let's see. Since 9/11, a lot of people have realized the brotherhood that the fire service is. I'm going to go over my background in the fire service here in a little bit, but I've come from a family of firefighters. My grandpa was actually the assistant chief of LA City Fire, and there's an amazing brotherhood. Unless you've been a part of it, you really can't explain it. This is a short clip from a new movie, actually, that New York has done, and it kind of gives you just a brief idea of what this brotherhood is about.
Look at these faces. Somebody in this room is gonna die. Firefighters die on this job. We are here to make sure that you are trained to the best of your ability to reduce your chances of getting hurt or killed on this job. Is that understood? Yes, sir. You're going left. Stay to the left more. Two sides here, everything, get the fire back in.
Every guy's duty is to pass on experience to the new guys.
These are called defensive. This is the floor. Put the foot on the floor and put it down.
Fire itself is a force to reckon with. You have to respect it. It'll take you 2 seconds. There's no conscience.
Whatever you're gonna do. People are trapped in the back. Hey, Chief! Okay, put it in oxygen!
That was the only direction I had in life. To be a fireman.
This job is a life and death job. Your life and your brother's life depend upon it.
There you go. Just put the boy down.
You're on the payroll. You ain't the brother. You ain't the brother with the brothers in the firehouse. You're the brother. And there's a big difference. You have to understand it. This is the New York City Fire Department. We do things our way.
That's kind of gives you a summary of what the brotherhood's like. It is amazing, and until I became one, I didn't understand it. I think that's why a lot of firefighters have a hard time speaking out about 9/11. It's affected us in a lot bigger, I shouldn't say a lot bigger ways, in a different way, where it's a more emotional thing, I think, as a group, as a collective occupation. So now I just want to go over fire science, just the basics, because some of the stuff I'm going to be going over will include this, and it's better just to kind of get you all on board here for the basics. Fire science, only gases burn, I'll go over that in a second. Auto ignition, flashpoint, rollover, flashover, and backdraft. The components of fire, you have to have fuel, air, and heat to make fire happen. And in the fire service, we like to joke, their fire square is all the firefighters would know, but fuel, air, heat, chief. Oh, and I forgot to tell you the fire triangle. If you take any one of those sides of a triangle out, the fire goes out. So take away the fuel, fire goes out. Take away the oxygen, fire goes out. Take away water, oxygen goes out. We like to say it's a fire square, and same thing. Take away any one of the four, and the fire goes out. So only vapors produce flames. And this is hard for some people to understand, but in flaming combustion of solids and liquid fuels, vaporization takes place before burning. And what I mean by that is, say you have a campfire, and in order for that wood to burn, you have to heat that wood up first, and it starts off-gassing. It's called pyrolysis. It's a chemical reaction that happens. It starts off-gassing, and then that will start burning. So where that comes in, I'll explain here in a second, but in order for ignition to happen, you have to heat something up enough for it to start off-gassing, and then ignition can happen. Or you can have auto-ignition, where auto-ignition, the temperature is high enough for combustion to be spontaneous. And what that means is it gets so hot on its own, it starts off-gassing, ignites on its own. You don't have to have a flame, you don't have to have a jet running into a building, you don't have to have anything like that. And then flashpoint, and this was where the fuel is going to come in. Flashpoint is the lowest temperature which the vapor pressure of a liquid is sufficient to produce flammable mixture. It still needs an ignition source. So what that means is gasoline has a very low flashpoint. Jet fuel has a very high flashpoint. What that means is gasoline, if I just filled it out here and I put a lighter to it, it's going to be pretty easy to light it. If I poured some jet fuel out here, it's going to be a lot harder to light it. Now rollover and flashover. When I was talking about the campfire, we'll picture, say, one of the ways we train is with pallets. So picture a bunch of wood pallets in a pile. When we start heating those up, they start off-gassing. What we'll see in the beginning, like in a house fire in the very early stages, is what we call rollover. It's actually one of the most fun things to see as a firefighter. I know it sounds funny, but most of us do like fighting fire. But we like to come into that because it's spectacular looking and it's still relatively safe. And so what's happening is the things that are burning are off-gassing. That gas is going up to the ceiling and it spreads out laterally. So as you're going to see here in a second in this example, it spreads out laterally. For us to put that fire out, we don't have to hit all that flame. All we have to do is hit water on the source of that off-gassing. And it goes whoop, right back down. And you'll see here, and it's a real short video, but you'll see this demonstration. Whoops. And just so you guys know, this is my first time presenting this at all. It's my first time doing one of these, so I'm just let me know. So this is a flash. This is a rollover. You're going to see the pallets on the bottom right. Let's see how that goes up across the ceiling. And they're going to put water just on those pallets, and the whole thing, you kind of can see it. The whole thing goes out instantly. So then a flashover, what happens in a flashover, this is one of the most dangerous things to firefighters. Kills a lot of firefighters. A flashover, you've all heard of backdraft too, and backdrafts are so rare they don't happen that often, I won't even really go into it. Flashovers are what do happen. Flashovers happen in the World Trade Center. A flashover is when the whole room, we talked about auto ignition, the whole room is heating up. It just keeps heating up. Everything in that room has an ignition temperature. As that room continues to heat and it builds up, if we don't cool the ceilings down, if we don't vent the building, there's a lot of things we don't do, that room's going to flash over. And once that does, everything in the room ignites. And if you're in that room, you're part of that room that ignites too. And I actually had an experience with one myself. I'll show you here in a second. Quite a few years, actually in 2001. So this is what one looks like. It's kind of loud. So just watch. One of the signs of impending flashover is a lot of heavy black smoke. In that black smoke, there's a lot of carbon. You saw that on 9/11 in the towers. There was tons of carbon coming out of those buildings. What that means is unburned products. It's not clean burning. So that's a flashover. So everything in that room instantly ignites. If there were any firefighters in there, they're on fire at this point too. And so they can knock it down. They've got hose lines on the outside. Normally we'd be fighting from the inside, but these guys, they saw the impending signs. It was a big warehouse, so they weren't gonna take the risk of going in there. So that's what a flashover looks like. Now I'm going to go into the teams that were there on 9/11. The main teams are called USAR teams. It's urban. The first responders were all obviously the FDNY guys. They were there immediately. Within a few days, the urban search and rescue teams in Seattle, we sent a team. And urban search and rescue it involves location rescue and initial medical stabilization of victims trapped in confined spaces. Structural collapse is most often the cause of victims being trapped, but victims may also be in transportation accidents, mines, collapsed trenches. And there's 28 FEMA task forces across the United States now. And they're spread throughout the continental United States. And so basically, it's teams, the regional teams that train, and then they have their cache of their equipment ready to go. And it's actually boxed up and ready to get on an airplane and go wherever in the country it's needed. And so the idea behind them having them spread out is kind of common sense. In case something happens in one area and they lose all their cache, they want people to be able to come in from the other areas to help them out. So then we also have MMST team, and that's what I was on during 9/11. It's a Metropolitan Medical Strike Team, and they're federally established teams prepared to respond if needed to assist with medical management, public health consequences of chemical, biological, and radiological incidents, which result from accident or deliberate acts. Same idea as the USAR teams, federally funded. They're not as big anymore. They were pushing them a lot before 2000, and then we kind of got rid of it. We still have it, but we're not getting the funding that we used to. So we went through a bunch of training for that. I'll go over that here in a second. So the reason why I want to share my story, the story behind Firefighters for 9/11 Truth, is because I heard some questions with from Richard's audience on why aren't more people speaking out. And I'm going to kind of go into my own personal opinion or my own experience of why I wasn't even looking at the information. And it kind of starts with, I'll actually give you a little brief thing on my education, just so you guys know who I am. I trained as an emergency medical technician in Los Angeles back in 1988. Then I became a paramedic in Sacramento in 91, and I received my Bachelor of Science in Mathematics from UC Davis in 93 with an engineering emphasis, and then became a firefighter right after that. And I was a paramedic first, and then an EMT with a paramedic, then a paramedic. I paid for school that way, and then I got hired on with the fire department right after that. And then I've been through rescue systems 1 and 2, only firefighters really know what that is, and then the MMST team. So my point on this whole thing is never ever give up. Because if you are talking to your friends that don't want to believe, don't keep shoving it down their throat, because that's what so many people did to me, and it made me put more walls up. But there's ways to get to people, and I'll kind of go over some of them at the end that I've been experimenting with that work a little bit better, that get people to kind of open up and not be emotional about it. But I resisted this for 7 years. Like I said, my lieutenant kept telling me, he kept challenging me, and I just didn't want to hear it, and I would shut him down every time he brought it up. So as I said, my grandpa was the Los Angeles fire chief. He was actually acting chief of the LA Fire Department for 9 months. That's him on the right there. And then my mom and dad, just so you know, I was raised, when you talk about authority, I was raised by, my dad was a Korean War vet, and he became a cop in LA, and my mom was a high school principal in LA. So I had a little bit of authority, and was taught not to question it, but not question it in a confrontational manner. Don't deal with the confrontation in the middle of it, deal with it afterwards. So I wanted to trust authority. I always did, because I trusted my parents. That was my mom, and then my dad is a cop, and then my mom is a principal. I'm sure she liked that picture. But that was on Halloween. That's not the way she normally went to school. So I was raised that way, and then like I said, I worked on the ambulance. I had a fascination with fire since I was a kid. First trained in Sacramento Fire Department on the left, and that's some high-end rescue training, and then fire department, and then I went to work for Seattle Fire Department in 1996. That's my station in Seattle. It's a double house, it's called. And then this is just some fun pictures from the Kingdom implosion. This was one of my favorite pictures of it. That was after the Kingdom came down. I like the monthly parking. Someone come out or something. So this is the USAR. So fast forward, I did the MMST training. I was getting brainwashed from the system. When I went through the training, it was in Hanford. It's in Washington. It was a federally funded program. I was there for a week of solid training. We lived there, and we went over all the terrorist type of attacks you could imagine. I had federal government people come in, explain, just put the fear in us like you wouldn't believe. And I don't know if you guys remember the battle in Seattle, the WTO. You know what's funny was I was laughing at those people and making fun of them, and I couldn't believe they were, we were just so brainwashed to basically not give them their time to speak, and I'm kind of embarrassed about it. Now, we didn't do it, as firefighters, we didn't do anything to stop them from speaking, we just laughed at them, basically, but I have a completely different feeling about that stuff now. But we were prepped for basically World War III, and I should have had an eye-opening experience then, because the government at that point, even our local government, was lying to the people, the public, so incredibly. I mean, it was just outrageous, and we knew it because we were being trained. They told the public, oh, everything's fine, there's a couple groups that could be coming in here or whatever, and they said they're going to be anarchists and all this. They tried to make it look like there were all these anarchists. Well, backstage, they got us so amped up with cops and everything. We were talking the Seattle cops, the King County cops. They had so much law enforcement, and they told these guys there are going to be people in here that were ready to kill them. That they said you expect to lose 30 to 50 officers during this thing. I mean, die, not just get beat up. So they had us all so jacked up that there's going to be this massive thing. When it went down the way it did, I was like, wow, we were lucky. This was all it was. Well, I think that's one of the ways they get people to be a lot more aggressive with this type of stuff. There was no reason for it, and I don't know if most of you know, but they've made a movie about this now. So, anyways, then after WTO, I went out to my experience with World Trade Center was just like everyone. I was at home and I saw it for the first time. I was hoping to be able to go. It's just most firefighters we want to help, and so I called my chief and asked if they were going to be local or if they were going to be calling up the MMST teams, and he said, I don't know, stand by. And then he called back and said, no, they're taking USAR, not MMST, because not very many people survived. Because MMST were more medically trained than USAR. USAR is the technical rescue, we're the medical side of it. And he said they didn't have very many survivors, so they need the technical rescue, not the medical. So we went out there about 5 weeks later, a bunch of us from Seattle, to go to the funerals. The fire service, like I said, the Brotherhood, it's huge, and we want to honor those guys that were killed. There were so many that were killed, 343, that those guys were doing the job, working on the pile, and then having about 10 funerals a day. They couldn't do it, and so they put out the call to the firehouses across the country to come in and help, and show up to these funerals to show the family that there are people care. So that's what we did. This is Station 10. This is right across the street from the towers. It miraculously survived, and it was heavily damaged, but it survived. And this is us, my friend Matt and I, out in front of the station. So we did walk. They treated us so amazingly well. The FDNY guys did, the community did, and the security, it was pretty surprising because they were stopping everybody, even construction workers, but if we were in firefighter uniforms, we were allowed to walk wherever we want. So a lot of the guys from New York took us down, we walked the pile and saw a lot of the stuff there. And it reminded me, the reason why I put those pictures of Kingdom in there, it reminded me of that. There was the same kind of dust. When I was at the Kingdom demolition, our job was to first watch it, but then to go around the buildings surrounding the Kingdom and evaluate them for damage. And it was the same kind of dust, the same kind of everything that the Kingdom implosion had. So I did think about it then, like, it just seems weird. It's like it didn't make sense, but I wanted to believe the official story so bad, and I didn't really take it any further. So this is my lieutenant who's been trying to, he's been trying to convince me forever. He's a 34-year firefighter, awesome guy. He's a famous writer, it's Earl Emerson. Where this is fascinating is he wrote this book. He's written over 20 novels, and a lot of them are bestsellers, but Vertical Burn he wrote before 9/11 happened. Now we, as a crew, he bounces ideas off us all the time for fire ideas. So he asked us point blank, this is like I said, this is probably 99, so it's well before 9/11. He asked us we have a building called the Columbia Center. It's a 76-story high-rise. He said, if you were going to burn the Columbia Center down, how would you do it? And so one of my ideas, we had a lot of different ideas, he ended up using this idea, was I would take a fire truck and I would fill it full of gasoline instead of water, and then when that first fire truck shows up, if I was that deviant, when that first fire truck shows up, plug that into the standpipe, pump gasoline through the building. So he did the calculations. He's a huge researcher, doesn't like to put anything in writing that he hasn't researched the heck out of. He started looking for examples all around the world of the hottest high-rise fires. What happened? Did they collapse? Did anything come down? He did the calculations on the gas being pumped through the building that way. That's probably one of the hottest ways you can make a building the hottest, because it's actually aerosolized and it's coming down from above. The figures he was coming out with, it wouldn't even get close to melting the steel. So when 9/11 happened, he was immediately suspicious. He's like, wait a second, I've researched the heck out of this. How did these things happen? It didn't make sense to him. So he started questioning from day one. I didn't listen, but it's an eye-opener to me now, because everything he told me makes sense now, but I just didn't have the mindset. So once I saw Richard Gage's presentation, I was motivated, and I went, wait a second, there is a lot more to this. We need to do something about it. And so I didn't want to just watch a whole bunch of movies, and I did do that too, but I wanted to get the information directly from what I considered credible sources. So what I did was I went to the Zacharias Moussaoui trial exhibits. I don't know if any of you have been there, but it's pretty impressive. It's actually the largest exhibit, or largest collection of evidence of any trial ever in history. And so it's a long process to go through it, but there's tons of pictures and tons of high resolution pictures. I wanted to see for myself, what is the evidence? How do they know that terrorists, how do they know these specific terrorists did this? How do they pin it on them so quickly? So when I went there, and I'm sure you guys have seen, some of you have probably seen this in other videos and stuff like that, but this is the evidence. This is what they found. And now remember, these 4 jets, 757s, and full of jet fuel, flying at full speed into buildings, directly into the ground and into the Pentagon. This is what survived. And so I'm going to you'll see here in a second. Let's see. There we go. As you can see, that's a passport. That's pretty well intact. Name and picture, really easy to see. This is a business card with one of the guy's name on it. This is a picture. This is from an ID. This is his picture. You can see these at the government exhibits. This is another ID with enough of a picture and a name left. This is another passport that was found. This was one of the bandanas one of the terrorists was wearing. They were reported to be wearing the bandanas, and they found the bandana. Now, the firefighters can back me up on this. I've been in a lot of fires where there's a whole lot less damage than there was in the World Trade Center. And I have never seen anything like this on people that were burned, that were destroyed and burned so bad they were never found again. So this kind of stuff started not making sense. And it's over and over. You start seeing all these IDs. This is how they put the pieces together. And when you learn about this, the passports, and Loose Change and some of those movies have covered this, the passport, that jet flies into the building at 600 plus miles an hour. The passport, if it didn't vaporize in that initial explosion, it had to come out of that building, stay floating in the air, the building for over almost an hour, the building collapses, and then it lands on top of the pile, because it was found by a cop the next day on top of the pile. So it gets pretty suspicious. It's what I say on the website is, I'm not here to say, as firefighters, we see the improbable. We're not saying the improbable is impossible, but when you start seeing it over and over and over on every angle of this, you have to start questioning it. So, and I was just going to share my short personal experience with that flashover. In 2001, I was burned in a flashover, and when you look at that ID, this is actually just some of my gear. This is I'll show you that. I ended up in the burn unit for a little bit. This is my helmet afterwards. This is designed to handle 800 degrees for a short period of time. The flashover, the investigator said that it was a whole team of investigators came in because I was burned and because some of it was new equipment we had. And they tested the area. They said where I was hit 1,400 degrees. I was only in there for a few seconds before I was able to get out of the building. And that's what the helmet ends up looking like. And they're trying, I'm trying to look at the IDs, the bandanas. How would a bandana survive? And those temperatures, when that plane hit, were over 1,400 degrees initially. So I don't buy the thing. So that was one of my first things, was like, wait a second, this doesn't make sense. When I started the website, I was then contacted by a guy named Colonel Nelson. So these are the pictures. Remember, this is 4 days after 9/11. These guys weren't on the flight manifest. They had pictures and they had names. And after I started the website, I had quoted this man on my website. He ends up contacting Earl, who contacted me and said, hey, there's a colonel who wants to talk to you. I'm like, oh gosh, what did I do? And so it's a little bit, because in the very beginning I was afraid, starting this website, I'm going to be pushing a lot of buttons and everything else, and I was afraid. When I talked to him, and I'm not here to say it's a conspiracy, I'm not here to say who did it, I don't know. But there's things that don't make sense. Now this man is a 34-year Air Force career. He was a crash investigator, Air Force crash investigator, colonel of the division. So he retired right before 9/11. And I asked him, I said, and he knew a lot of the investigators that were there. And I said, when did you first suspect something? And he said, I knew it. Well, he uses the word inside job, but he goes, I knew it was an inside job on day 3. And I said, how did you know that? And he said, Eric, I've investigated a lot of crash sites. And he said, I can tell you this, with those kind of speeds, that kind of fuel load, and that kind of destruction, and that difficult access, the buildings that collapse on top of them, he said, you don't pull that kind of evidence out in 3 days. He goes, that is weeks and weeks of investigation to ever get to that point. So that kind of opened my eyes. It's like, I'm looking at top investigators around the country that are saying, this doesn't make sense. And this guy, is he going to bash America? I mean, he's a 34-year Air Force career. No, he's a patriot. He's a good friend of mine now, and I talk to him on a regular basis, and he's pretty amazing. So that's kind of my story. So as I said, don't give up on your friends. I was an ardent believer in the official story. I backed it up, and as you see, I'm here today. So I've definitely changed my tune. So this is NIST, and now we'll get into the evidence stuff. NIST, NFPA, and the evidence. So most of you, it sounds like it's research 9/11 already. So most of you know NIST. I'll just go over it briefly. They were founded in 1901. They're not the ones who typically investigate fires, something like this. So it's a little suspicious that they gave it to this group. But they were founded in 1901. NIST is a non-regulatory federal agency within the U.S. Department of Commerce. NIST's mission is to promote U.S. innovation, industrial competitiveness, by advancing measurement, science, standards, and technology in ways that enhance economic security and improve our quality of life. Sounds great. In response to the World Trade Center tragedy, they conducted a 3-year building fire and safety investigation to study the factors contributing to the probable cause or causes of post-impact collapse of the World Trade Centers 1, 2, and 7. So that's kind of our source. That's who we're looking to for answers. These are the guys who are supposed to investigate it. And I'm going to go over the manual, and I'll talk about it here in a second, the NFPA manual. And they violated so many laws. It's not just laws, these are guidelines, but they did violate a lot of federal evidence laws too. But this is the National Fire Protection Association. And now this has been around since 1896, and it's to reduce the worldwide burden of fire and other hazards on the quality of life by providing and advocating consensus, codes, standards, research, training, and education. They're the world's leading advocate of fire prevention and an authoritative source on public safety. NFPA develops, publishes, and disseminates more than 300 consensus codes and standards intended to minimize the possibility and effects of fire and other risks. Sounds great too. In reality, what these guys do is the NFPA produces a lot of guidelines, and they're not laws, they're not mandates, we don't have to follow them. They're the national standards though. So if we don't follow them, and say a firefighter gets hurt or killed, that department's going to have a lot of explaining to do why they're not following the national standards. One of the big ones that most firefighters know about is we call a 2-in, 2-out rule. What that means is for every 2 firefighters in a fire, you have to have 2 on the outside ready to rescue them. And departments across the country didn't have the funding, and so a lot of departments didn't operate that way. In Seattle, we're now operating that way. We had a period where a few stations weren't that way, and the big thing they sold it on was our union did to our city was you get 1 firefighter hurt or injured, the lawsuit's going to pay for the additional staffing. It's really hard for a city to go to court and defend themselves when the national standards 2-in, 2-out, and they've got all the research to back it up how much safer it is when you fight a fire that way. So standards, that's like I said, they set standards, and here's just some examples. Standard for fire officer professional, standard for fire apparatus, standard for professional qualification, blah, blah, blah. Everything you can think of, NFPA's got books on. And so, I mentioned George Wendt. I'll talk about him at the end. He's the actual investigator that I've been debating on this public forum. Not really debating, I'm asking him questions and he's making fun of me. He won't answer any of my questions. So, anyways, he's on all these boards. He helped write these manuals. He's one of the top guys in the country. He was there on 9/11. And when you see how he reacts to all this, it's going to shock you. So NFPA 921, and that's this book. That was one of the things when I started believing the way I did, started questioning. I went, well, let me go get the manual. And it was a hard manual to find, actually, because the fire departments, we throw them away every few years. New ones come out all the time. And so I had to get this online. I found someone who had one, 2001 edition. So it's actually the one that they should have been using on 9/11. And definition, so I'm just going to go, kind of what this presentation is going to be is this manual, what they say to do, and what was actually done. So definition of an investigation. Investigation is just a careful search or examination in order to discover facts. Pretty common sense. So I'm going to ask all of you guys to play investigator with me. As I said, I'm not a professional investigator, but I have asked the top guys in the country, why they did not do certain things, and not one of them will give me an honest answer. Or not even, they won't even give me an answer. I have not found an investigator yet, and a lot of investigators, like in our Seattle Fire Department, are my friends, and they're nice about it, but like, I can't give you an idea. They say, hey, call this guy at the ATF, he's one of the top in the country, send them emails, no one's answered my questions. So to me, that's a huge red flag. If nobody can answer why they destroyed evidence and why they did not test for explosives, that's a pretty big thing. So I'm going to ask you to play investigator with me. When you show up on a fire scene, and most firefighters in big cities especially, we're trained in the basics of fire investigation because we're the first eyes on the scene. And so when the investigators after a big fire especially, they always come up to us and ask us what we saw, where was the source, all the different things. And if it's minor fire damage, it's in our city, if it's less than $20,000, we don't have to call out the investigators. We can investigate ourselves, put down the cause, and that's it, because it's just a small dollar amount. Once anyone's injured or it's over $20,000, we don't investigate. We call in the guys who've actually gone through more training than us. So, but as an investigator, you're basing a lot of your information on your past experience and what you've been taught. And so this is why I think this is important. When other collapses, these are obviously not 9/11 collapses, but I'm going to show you what buildings typically look like when they collapse. And I personally have seen the Kingdom come down. I've seen a hotel in Seattle demolished, and then I've seen several wood frame structures, some large wood frame structures collapse. And none of them, I will tell you this, none of them except for the demolitions came down in a perfectly straight fashion like Richard was going over so much in this presentation. It just doesn't happen that way. When you look at it, common sense, one side weakens, it falls toward the weakened side. So here's some demolitions gone bad, is what I call it. Now this is obviously not built to the same standards as the World Trade Center. Look at, the building stays intact. The bottom comes up, but it stays intact. It doesn't explode into dust. Here's another one. This one, same thing, demolition gone bad. Oh, actually, watch the base of the building and how hard this thing hits. Surprisingly, that didn't explode into dust either. This is the one I think is one of the most compelling. And just to give you a little background on this is in Manila, and it was a building that was so poorly constructed. There was no earthquake, there was no fire, there was no damage. It's so poorly constructed, this building failed on its own. They saw the building starting to lean, some people got out of the building. And this is a pretty significant high-rise. So if it's built that poorly that it falls over on its own, you can't tell me that it was built to the same standards as the World Trade Center. And watch what it does when it goes down. Watch how it stays in, like Richard talked about, the pancakes and the floor still staying there. Watch. This is pretty amazing.
Manila, Philippines. Panicked families run for their lives. Their high-rise apartment building is beginning to tilt. An urgent evacuation is underway. And suddenly, men, women, and children are still running for safety when the foundation gives way. The building rips from power lines, threatening to ignite the entire neighborhood. The tower finally comes down in a massive pile of pulverized concrete and steel. Hundreds are now homeless. Their possessions gone forever. Yet amazingly, no one is killed or even injured. Shoddy construction is blamed for the disaster. Criminal charges are filed against the building's owner. He's lucky they don't include murder.
So as you can see, that building stayed together pretty well up until the moment it struck another solid building. It didn't explode into dust either on its own. It didn't explode into dust either on its own. Okay, so now high-rise fires. That's another thing you want to look at compared to other high-rise fires. At the time of 9/11, there were a few of them. These actually have happened post 9/11. I don't know how many of you have heard of this. This is the Beijing fire in February of this year. So this is what we would expect. And one of the things, I brought this up on the Firehouse Forum, and one of the things another firefighter brought up, which said, well, this was built to new standards because of 9/11. Well, no, they can't tell me that because they didn't finish the investigation on World Trade Center 7 until November of 2008. They didn't write new codes and to come up with the new science and build these buildings to different standards. This was a building in China, in Beijing, and you're going to see here, actually, if I can get there we go. This is a pretty spectacular fire. This was during the Chinese New Year. The fireworks is what set this building off. It was a hotel, the Mandarin Hotel. It was under construction, but it was getting close to being completed. This was 44 stories. The World Trade Center 7 was 47 stories. So this was only 3 stories less. And when I show you the videos of Trade Center 7, which you've probably seen, it's not even the same lane. Pretty spectacular, as you can see. Why does that keep doing that? So, and then that's just a different angle, kind of gives you an idea of it's the entire. This is what we call well involved. Nobody would want in here to fight this fire from the inside. So that's a lot of what we call BTUs, a lot of heat being generated. There's another picture of it. So you can see every single floor completely involved. This is the aftermath. And that angle you see to the building, it was kind of a funky. It was that shape to begin with. That's not from melting. So this, all the windows, everything's completely burned up, and the building's still standing today. So that should be an indicator. Now, again, you've probably seen this, but here's World Trade Center 7. You can see the difference. There's not much fire, significant amount of fire. There's a lot of debate on that fire service. A lot of guys say there was a lot of fire. I wasn't there, so I can't vouch for it. One of my chiefs was there. He originally believed the official story. He aggressively debated me on this in the beginning. He is now on board, and he is now seeing it, remembering it differently. It's kind of funny. But he said, oh, it was a lot of fire. This is one of the last pictures before it collapsed. Now if that was in Seattle or Denver and there was nothing else going on and we showed up, yeah, that's a lot of fire. We're gonna be working hard on that. But compared to these other high rises and compared to the other buildings on 9/11, that's not very much fire. This is the aftermath of World Trade Center 7. You see the difference between that and Beijing. So as an investigator now, you're going to start asking questions like, wait a second, this doesn't look right. I'll skip this one. You've seen that. The new footage of it, but most people have seen it. Now, World Trade Center 3. I want to, as an investigator, you're going to compare the damage. Like you have to look at what's happened and go through your brain, go through your experience, go through the book, and find out what can make that kind of damage. So, World Trade Center 3. These other buildings are significant because a lot of some of the official story originally was that the heavy damage from the falling debris is what brought it down. Well, here's World Trade Center 3. These pictures, there's 2 pictures here. The photographer who took these was actually, he died in the second collapse. So this is Trade Center 3. That's World Trade Center 3 after the first collapse. Now that is a massive amount of structural damage. And as you see on the right there, that's been shredded and it's still standing. It didn't implode into itself at near free fall speed. Here's the second picture. This is after the second tower. That's the same building. After the second tower collapsed. That took, now you've got to think about it. World Trade Centers 1 and 2 collapsed just with the top of that building coming down one floor basically, and they say pile drove the thing. Well, this was more than the one floor, or more than those 23 floors. This was 100-something floors coming down twice. So, and the base of this building is still standing. So this, and that's World Trade Center 4, much more fire damage than World Trade Center 7, and it's still standing. This is World Trade Center 4 from a different angle. And these buildings were there when I was there. And this is World Trade Center 6. Now that entire core of that building has been gutted out, but the shell is still standing. So you start looking at this stuff, it's like, well, this doesn't make sense. So what would explain this? So that's where we go to the manual. This edition was approved as the American National Standard on February 9th, 2001. And just to put a disclaimer in, I'm going to go over at the end of that debate, one of the things that fire investigator said was, this is not the manual we should be using. And so I challenged him. I said, well, what manual should we be using? And he said, and he wouldn't give me, he said this was a fire due to a terrorist. You don't use that manual. It's totally out of context. And And I said, okay, well, enlighten me, which one should we use? His response basically was, you're a moron, there wasn't a manual yet for that because it hadn't happened yet. I'm like, okay, so we don't use any manuals because this event hasn't happened yet. I'll read it to you, you're just going to be blown away. So what's funny is I caught him on a CNN article, and they were debating a fire where someone was killed. The guy was put to death, the arsonist, and it turns out they had it wrong, and they had the wrong guy. They already executed him. So George was defending the investigator, and he said he followed the NFPA 921. And CNN said, well, a lot of investigators around the country say that's not the manual. It's not the one to follow. George, being on the committee, said he disagreed. He said that is a blatant lie. He said, show me the facts. He goes, this is the one we use in fire and explosion. So he himself has said this is the one we use, but when it applies to 9/11, we don't use it. So, you know, I'm going to have people debate me in the fire service, but I haven't had anyone tell me which manual we should use. So there's other guys from Fire Engineering Magazine that have written articles on this, and they all say NFPA 921 is the one we should be using. So we're just going to go on the assumption this is the one we should use. So basic methodology, just kind of the basics. Fire explosion investigation is a complex endeavor involving skill, technology, knowledge, and science. The compilation of factual data, as well as an analysis of those facts, should be accomplished objectively and truthfully. That's a big word. The basic methodology of the fire investigation should rely on the use of a systematic approach and attention to all relevant details. The use of a new systematic approach often will uncover new factual data for analysis, which may require previous conclusions to be reevaluated. So they're saying keep an open mind, don't rule things out. You know, this is this complex thing, and consider all possible sources. So technically you're supposed to use the scientific method, which makes sense. Now, federal evidence rules. There are basically three types of evidence, all of which in some manner relate to fire investigations. They're demonstrative evidence, documentary evidence, and testimonial. What we're going to go on a lot in this one is testimonial, because we're going to show you clips of people being interviewed right after. And so there's another one, cause not known until the end. This is, remember, keep your mind open until the end of the investigation. I'm going to show you some of what NIST did. They didn't have an open mind. Generally, the cause of a fire explosion is not known until near the end of the investigation. Therefore, the evidentiary blah, 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 down the bottom. As a result, the entire fire scene should be considered physical evidence and should be protected and preserved. I don't know how many of you know, but they shipped the debris out as fast as they could to have it recycled. They destroyed it as fast as they could. NIST ended up doing their final investigation with no evidence in World Trade Center 7. I don't know how they can do that, but they did. So now chapter 18, we're going to get into the fun stuff here, explosions. So basically, historically, the term explosion has been difficult to define precisely. For fire and explosion investigation, an explosion is the sudden conversion of potential energy, chemical or mechanical, into kinetic energy with the production of release of gas under production and release of gas under pressure. These high-pressure gases then do the mechanical work such as moving, changing, or shattering nearby materials. We saw a lot of that on 9/11. Although an explosion is almost always accompanied by the production of a loud noise, the noise itself is not an essential element of the definition of an explosion. Now I'll show you later, NIST, they say one of the reasons they didn't test for explosives was there is no sound. Well, it's in the manual, that's not an essential element. High order damage, this is pretty clear. High order damage is characterized by shattering of the structure, producing small pulverized debris. Walls, roofs, and structural members are splintered or shattered with the building completely demolished. Debris is thrown great distances, possibly hundreds of feet. And if you guys watch Richard's presentation, we know several hundred feet. High order damage is the result of rapid rates of pressure rise. That's explosives. Is that high order damage? Looks exactly what that section describes. Again, it's the debris is thrown great distances, possibly hundreds of feet. And that's definitely what we see here. So just that one thing alone should start making these investigators think, wow, we really should consider the possibility of explosives. And remember, this is an investigation. The whole reason we're here today debating this is because this stuff was not tested for. This is insane. I mean, it's absolutely insane. We test house fires for accelerants. I mean, if we show up, this is one of the analogies I like to use on guys at work. And if they don't want to hear it, they're still not going to hear it. But anyone with common sense who's non-emotionally attached to the outcome, this makes sense to them. If we roll up on a house fire, say it's a 2-story with a basement, and all 3 floors are well involved, and we're only several blocks from the house, and with the initial calls, we were there within 2 or 3 minutes of the initial call. And all 3 floors are well involved. Well, that's already an indicator that this thing probably has accelerants. But then the neighbor across the street tells us that they saw flashes happen on all 3 floors within seconds of each other. Then we find out this owner has a history history of arson. And then we also find out a few weeks before this, he took out extra insurance for this building. And you're going to see here in a minute that happened. So you take out extra insurance for an arson type event. Now, what firefighter or investigator is not going to investigate, or is not going to test the debris for accelerants? I mean, it's a no-brainer, and I use that in the debate in the forum. They can't, nobody's going to argue that. Of course they're going to test it. So, with all these same indicators on 9/11, why did they refuse to test for the accelerants? There's no excuse. So now high explosives, 18.12.2. This one's pretty huge. High explosives are characterized by a detonation propagation mechanism. Common high explosives are dynamites, water gel, TNT, ANFO, RDX, and PETN. Now, for those of you who don't know, RDX is invented back in the early 1800s was first, 1900s it was patented and was used in World War II. It's used in some ways in plastic explosives now, and PETN is used in plastic explosives. So they've considered all types in fires. They've seen, across the country, we've seen all kinds of things being used. Actually, Seattle years ago, actually one of the Denver guys here today reminded me, and we were training this, and he's going to give me the video. I forgot all about it. We had a series of fires, arson fires happen in Seattle years ago, where they were using exotic accelerants, and it was freaking everybody out. And so then Seattle did a ton of research into it, and I'm excited to get that tape and review it again. But anyways, here's high explosives are designed to produce shattering effects by virtue of high rate of pressure rise and extremely high detonation pressures, on order of a million pounds per square inch. That's a lot of energy. The effects produced by diffuse phase, and this is fuel air, so there's a difference here. We're talking about solid explosives, which are like the ones I just talked about, TNT, ANFO, RDX, thermite, that type of thing, or fuel air explosions. Now, fuel air would be jet fuel. So the official story says jet fuel brought this down. And I don't know how many of you know, the lobby, though, was blown out. I'm going to show you a video here in a second to kind of point things out. The lobby was blown out. The windows were blown out. People were killed initially in the initial impact. The official story, and what most firefighters that believe the official story, the way they still defend this today, was that fireball created a pressure wave that came down as a jet fireball, went down the elevator shaft, blew out in the lobby, and blew all those windows out. I believed it too. Although I didn't really, but I just made myself believe this. Like, that just doesn't make sense, because the part, even back then, that didn't make sense to me was, how did it pick the lobby? The elevator shaft goes down to the basement, and there's so many floors above the lobby. How did it know just to go out that one floor? Because that's where the windows were blown out. Like, was just more elevators open in that one? And from my experience with elevators, if the doors are open on the bottom floor in the lobby, that means they're closed up top. So how would it follow? And then it has to go through the elevator and out the door. None of it makes sense. There's always going to be a door closed either at the base or at the top. So you're not going to have the ability to send a massive pressure wave down these elevator shafts that way. And people, you'll see, if you watch the 9/11 documentary from the Nade brothers, people came out, were in the elevator for 15-20 minutes after the initial impact. They had no idea what had happened. Their elevator stopped, they're stuck in there, and they're totally fine. If there's big fireballs coming down blowing things out, they wouldn't survive that. So it doesn't make sense. So the effects produced by diffuse phase, fuel air explosions, and solid explosives are very different. This is very clear. In a diffuse phase explosion, structural damage will tend to be uniform and omnidirectional, and there will be relatively widespread evidence of burning, scorching, and blistering. Even as a non-firefighter, this makes sense to you. If you've got a fireball that comes down and blasts things out, that's a lot of heat, and you're going to have a lot of burning. And if you've all seen pictures of the aftermath of a fire, there's soot damage, there's residue, there's all kinds of stuff. The windows are all blacked out. That's what happens in a fuel, like a natural gas explosion, gasoline explosion, jet fuel explosion. That's what you'd expect to see. Second part of this, in contrast, the rate of combustion of a solid explosive is extremely fast in comparison to the speed of sound. Therefore, pressure does not equalize to the explosion volume, and extremely high pressures are generated near the explosive. The pressure and resultant level of damage rapidly decay with the distance away from the center of explosion. At the location of the explosion, there should be evidence of crushing, splintering, and shattering effects produced by the higher pressures. Away from the source of explosion, there is usually very little evidence of intense burning or scorching, except where hot shrapnel or firebrands have landed on combustible materials. So, now watch this video, and I'll turn on this little laser thing and see if I can point things out to you. Now, since we've explained that, look at the lobby, and tell me if it looks like a fireball's gone through that lobby.
Right away, a guy from the Port Authority told them the damage
is somewhere above the 78th floor.
Pay attention to the planes.
Look around.
If there was high heat in there, those planes would be all shriveled up.
Something had happened right
Yes,
there.
all over those walls.
You just saw that all the windows were blown out. The lobby looked like the plane hit the lobby.
Now I'll show you that again. Look at the plans, look at the walls. There's not one shred of evidence of high heat in there, of any residue, of any scorching, of anything, other than a massive blast.
Right away, a guy from the Port Authority told him the damage is somewhere above the 78th floor. But all you had to do was look around. It was obvious. Something had happened right there in the lobby.
You just saw that all the windows were blown out. The lobby looked like the plane hit the lobby.
So that's not what we expect from fuel-air explosions. So now in 18.13, investigating the explosion scene. Oops. What happened? It's going backwards. How did I do that? Investigating the explosion scene. The objectives of the explosion scene investigation are no different from those of a regular fire investigation. Now, some people disagree, but it's pretty clear. You still have to determine the origin, identify the fuel and ignition source, determine the cause, and establish the responsibility for the incident. When damage is very extensive and includes much structural damage, an explosion dynamics expert and a structural expert should be consulted early in the investigation to aid in the complex issues involved. In developing the evidence, the investigator should examine witness accounts, and that's a huge one because we're going to show you some stuff here. Maintenance records, operational logs, manuals, weather reports, previous incident reports, and other relevant records. Now, Richard's gone over in his presentation. I'm going to put it in mine later on the elevator company that was doing the work 6 months before 9/11 that had access to all the core columns. Now, that's a maintenance record and operational logs. Why weren't those researched? Why? I mean, every stone should have been turned over. There's no excuse for this. It's pretty crystal clear. So now, 18.13.2.1, identify explosion or fire. Here we go. First term, whether it was a fire explosion or both, and which came first. Often the evidence of an explosion is not obvious. So everyone says, oh, it's obvious the plane hit it. Well, the manual says it's not obvious. The investigator should look for signs of an overpressure condition existing within the structure, including displacement or bulging of walls, which we definitely had, floors, ceilings, doors, windows, roofs, we had all of that. The investigator should look for and assess the nature and extent of the heat damage to the structure and its components and decide whether it can be attributed to fire alone. Now, as you know, we have molten steel and concrete, which we'll show here in a second, but there's definitely high heat. They should have been ID force vectors. I gave it a time thing, so I got to speed this up a little bit. Analyze fuel source. This is another big one. Once the origin or epicenter of the explosion has been identified, the investigator should determine the fuel. This is done by a comparison of the nature and type of damage to the known available fuels at the scene. So what they mean by that in normal fire is, if this house blew up and we don't find, we're not going to expect high accelerants there, or exotic accelerants, but there might be propane or natural gas. Look at the damage and see if it's, does it match up. All available fuel sources should be considered and eliminated until one fuel can be identified as meeting all of the physical damage. And remember, fuel is what does not just gasoline or jet fuel, it's also exotic accelerants or explosives. For example, if the epicenter of the explosion is identified as a 6-foot crater of pulverized concrete in the center of the floor, fugitive natural gas can be eliminated as the fuel. It's just like jet fuel. They didn't put jet fuel in there, but jet fuel is going to do the same thing as natural gas. It's not going to create pulverized concrete. And only fuels that can create seeded explosions should be considered. So they should have tested for exotic accelerants. Again, it's just over and over. Chemical analysis, and here we go. NIST says they didn't test for it, but the chemical analysis of debris, soil, or air samples can be helpful in identifying the fuel. With explosives or liquid fuels, gas chromatography and mass spectrography or other chemical tests of properly collected samples may be able to identify their presence. Now here's the big one that I keep asking all the fire investigators that I run into about this: exotic accelerants. Exotic accelerants, and this is thermite, is named in the 19.2.4 exotic accelerants. Thermite mixtures also produce produce exceedingly hot fires. Such accelerants generally leave residues that may be visually or chemically identifiable. Exotic accelerants have been hypothesized as having been used to start or accelerate some rapidly growing fires and were referred to in these particular instances as high-temperature accelerants, HTAs. And that's what the Denver firefighter and I were talking about, the HTA fires in Seattle. Indicators of Indicators of exotic accelerants include exceedingly rapid rate of fire growth, brilliant flares, blah, 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 and melted steel or concrete. I'm going to show you a video where in any fire where the rate of fire growth is considered exceedingly rapid, other reasons for this should be considered in addition to the use of an accelerant, exotic or otherwise. So melted steel and concrete is absolutely critical. When you have that, you know as a firefighter that jet fuel does not melt concrete. Jet fuel does not melt steel. And I'm going to go over the temperatures here in a second. Thermite is a pyrotechnic composition of metal powder and metal oxide, which produces an aluminothermic reaction known as the thermite reaction. It is not explosive, but it can create short bursts of extremely high temperatures that focused on a very small area for a short period of time. NIST also did not find any evidence that missiles were fired or hit the tires. They try to, they kind of distract from the question is here. Instead, photographs and videos from several angles clearly show the collapse initiated the fire and impact force, blah, blah, blah. This is another big one here. World Trade Center 7. In addition, no blast sounds were heard on the audio tracks of video recordings during the collapse of World Trade Center or reported by witnesses. Well, I'm out of time. Not quite, but I'm going to go fast on these. You're going to see these are credible witnesses. Now, as a fire investigator, and the fires I've been in when there's significant damage, one of the first things the fire investigators do, what did you see? What did you hear? They're asking that all the time. I've been on a couple fires where ATF comes in. They want to know, the first guy's in there, they want to know what happened. Well, here's the first guy's in there. Hear what they say.
New York's bravest never had a chance.
We really never got that close to the building. Explosion blew and it knocked everybody over.
Explosion blew, knocked everybody over. He said there's no audio recordings of explosions.
Yeah, here's one of the guys. You can tell you I'm okay, all right? Here, look. You want to call your mother?
No expert, but that sounds like an explosion.
Don't worry about it. We can make calls right now.
As we were getting our gear on and making our way to the stairway, there was a heavy-duty explosion.
Another big explosion. Any other time, flames coming out of this.
So there you get that. Tonight's movie, I've already seen it. You're going to hear a lot of the explosions. They'll bring over way more than this, but I just want you to hear, there's some actual, not only these post-witnesses where they're post-fire, these are during the fire. So this is actually radio transmissions from firefighters that were killed on 9/11.
Then in the radio transmissions from September 11, firefighters reported numerous additional explosions going off within the buildings.
So pretty obvious there were explosions. Now a lot of people try to dismiss that, and they say it's fuel oil tanks like in World Trade Center 7, or it's boiler rooms, or it's transformers. I don't even let them go there because it's an investigation. In an investigation, if you heard an explosion, you have to investigate what caused the explosion. You don't have the people afterwards saying, oh yeah, it was this, or this, but no one tested for it. No, we test that stuff. In a routine house fire, if we heard explosions going off all over the house, we're going to test for it. So there's no excuse. Now Barry Jennings, again, no witnesses. I'm just going to play this quick. Most people probably heard Barry. Here's the day of the thing. And this was from World Trade Center 7. And again, remember you saw NIST say, no witnesses.
Walking down the stairs to get to the 8th floor. Big explosion. Blew us back into the 8th floor.
Just so you know, Barry Jennings was the emergency coordinator for the New York Housing Authority. He's not just a guy walking down the street who doesn't know what he's talking about.
And I turned the headset. I said, this is it. We're dead. We're not going to make it out of here. I took a fire extinguisher and I bust the window out. This was this gentleman here heard my cries for help. Hi, my name is Barry James. I'm 52 years old.
We're going to be out of time, so you get the point. Barry talks about it again. He's been talking about it for years. He's now dead, and nobody knows exactly how he died. But he died when they said there were no witnesses. So I'm not saying that they did anything. I'm just saying he died. They said there was no witnesses. He died right before this report came out. Is it possible that thermite? This is from NIST. Remember, these are the investigators. This is not my opinion. This is you go to their website. This is their reasons. Is it possible that thermite or thermate contributed to the collapse of World Trade Center 7? NIST has looked at the application and use of thermite and has determined that it's used to sever columns in WTC 7 on 9/11 and 1 was unlikely. So they've looked at it, but they didn't test for it. It's unlikely that 100 pounds of thermite or more could have been carried into World Trade Center 7 and placed around columns without being detected. So, I mean, what investigator? Because something's hard, we don't investigate it. It doesn't make any sense. I mean, it could have been hard, so it's not a possibility. There's no, like I said, no excuse. Now, the overinsurance that I talked about, 19.4.6 covers it in the manual. Overinsurance. Overinsurance, another indicator closely related to financial stress, is overinsurance. Overinsurance is a condition whereby the insurance coverage is greater than the value of the property in the value policy state, or whereby there are multiple policies on the property. There were multiple. Lucky Larry Silverstein. I'm not saying he had anything to do with it. Again, I'm not here to point fingers, but he would be a suspect in any fire. The owner is always a suspect until we rule it out. So Lucky Larry Silverstein, World Trade Center owner, he actually was the leaseholder and owner of World Trade Center 7. He had taken out a massive insurance policy with a specific clause for a terrorist attack only weeks before the attack. He then sued for double indemnity since there were 2 plane strikes, so he tried to get double what each was supposed to get, seeking $7.2 billion. He claims that the insurance company would be entitled to his Silverstein's claims that his company would be entitled to as much as $16.2 billion from American Airlines, United, and others. So this guy obviously had a financial stake in this. He should have been investigated. 19.4.8.2.6, extremism. One of the things that the top NFPA guy debated with me, he said that this is not the manual for terrorism. I beg to differ, it covers terrorism. Extremism. Extremism motivated fire setting is committed to further a social, political, or religious cause. Terrorism specifically. The target set by terrorists may appear to be at random, however, target locations are generally selected with some degree of political or economic significance. Political targets generally include government offices, newspapers, universities, political parties, blah, blah, blah. The terrorist may include fire as but one of a variety of weapons, along with explosives, used in furthering his or her goal. How would we rule out that terrorists did not plant explosives? And when you see the movie today, you're going to see all the reports that terrorists were planting explosives that day. It's not just reports, it's evidence. So how do we rule that out? How do we say that terrorists did not put explosives? They did in '93. They put explosives down in the basement of World Trade Center 1. So how do we confirm that they didn't do it this time without testing for it? So destruction of evidence. Bill Manning, I was going to read it but don't have time. Bill Manning, basically, he was a fire engineering editor. Like I said, fire engineering is the more technical magazine. I read his article in the very beginning, and he wrote it right after 9/11. He had so many good points, but I just didn't want to believe. And he said, did they throw away the locked doors from the Triangle Shirtwaist fire? Did they throw away the gas can used at the Happy Land Social Club fire? All firefighters would know these fires. Did they cast aside the pressure regulating valves at the Meridian Plaza fire? Of course not, but that's what they're doing at the World Trade Center. For more than 3 months, they've been taking the steel. And so he went on and he challenged firefighters. He said, this is your call to action. Visit the World Trade Center investigation. Call to action, then contact the representatives in Congress and officials in Washington and help us correct this problem immediately. He said he said the same thing. There's no excuse for this. So, spoliation of evidence. Let's see if this is spoilage just basically goes over, it refers to loss, destruction, blah, blah, blah. You need to preserve the evidence. Maintenance of evidence, again, preserve the evidence. Once evidence has been removed, it should be maintained and not be destroyed or altered until others who have a reasonable interest in the matter have been notified. Any destructive testing or destructive examination of the evidence may be necessary should occur only after all reasonably known parties have been notified in advance and given the opportunity to participate in or observe the testing. So would NIST have a reasonable interest since they're the ones determining cause? Tasked with determining cause, they have a major interest. So your entire investigation, this is from the NIST website. Your entire investigation, this was from frequently asked questions, your entire investigation included no physical evidence. How can you be so sure you know what happened? Well, in general, much less evidence existed for World Trade Center 7 than for the two World Trade Center towers. The steel for 1 and 2 contained distinguishing characteristics that enabled it to be identified once removed from the site during recovery efforts. However, the same was not true for the World Trade Center 7 steel. Now, I don't know about you, but I don't think it's that difficult when you got big piles to mark this pile and put it in a pile over here and mark this pile and take it somewhere else. It's not hard to do. So when house fires, the firefighters are backing me up. One of the things when we're doing overhaul and we're still looking for cause, we're very careful with where we move things so the investigators know what room it came from. So, however, the same was, and that's in a small room, big piles are easier. However, the same was not true for the World Trade Center 7 steel. Certainly there is a lot less visual and audio evidence of the World Trade Center 7 collapse compared to the collapses, blah, blah, blah. Basically, they did their entire investigation with no evidence. They destroyed all evidence before they investigated. This is insane. Here's actually a fire professor that talks about it.
We pressed early on for a full-scale investigation, and of course one of the issues was while we were doing that, the evidence from the buildings was being destroyed as we were talking about it. And we were advocating early on back then that the process of removing the steel, certainly that wasn't an issue of getting it off the site. But once it was off the site, because this is of course part of a rescue and recovery operation, once it was off the site, there was no real need for speed basically to get this steel cut up into small pieces and shipped overseas for scrap.
The structural steel that would have been key to figuring out what happened to these buildings. What happened to that? Well, New York City accepted a plan 11 days after the impact to immediately start recycling the steel, not even in the United States, where some of it might have gotten saved inadvertently. No, it was put on ships bound for India and China to be melted down.
We were concerned about that, and we understood early on that those are going to hold the keys to knowing exactly how the buildings came down. And unfortunately, we were not successful in getting the elected officials and the powers that be to do that. When it was all said and done, we only had a relatively very, very small portion of the steel from those buildings.
There was about 250 pieces of structural steel that we know of saved for analysis, but out of some 200,000 tons.
There are certain things that really kind of, is that true? And then the calling away the evidence was definitely one of them, especially that prosecutor like Rudolph Giuliani. I mean, who should have known that, take away forensic evidence from a crime scene,
It's hard to imagine how, at a crime scene, you can destroy evidence so quickly and thoroughly and get away with it.
So there's a ton of federal evidence laws that they violated that day. I actually have a guy who was a lawyer that sent me an incredible, it's just page after page after page of every evidence law they wrote. And I'm not going to get into those now, but as you can see, they destroyed the evidence. So if you're playing investigator, would you have tested for exotic accelerants? So we've got witness testimony, we've got audio recordings, we've got firefighters that are reporting it, we've got molten steel and concrete, we've got every indicator in the book. It's just that, it's an investigation. Why would we not test for it? So as firefighters from 9/11 Truth, and there's officially 50 of us on the thing, there's a lot more supporting us, like my chief and battalion chief. They support without their names being on there, but they say it's okay for me to say that. But it's just the political reasons. There's a lot of people are not willing to join forces yet, but I think they will with time. So I'm saying, please join us in demanding an investigation that follows national standards. That's all we're asking for. We're not asking for anything huge. We're not saying put anyone in jail. Let's test this thing the way it should have been tested. There are still there's still some steel left from memorials and things like that they can test. These investigators just recently uncovered some pretty amazing stuff. Private companies, not companies, but there were a few private companies tested and found all evidence of it with third main. So that's the end of the fire investigation. How much time do I have left? 20 minutes. Okay. So the radios. This is what I just wanted to cover briefly. This is firefighters. Whether you believe 9/11 should have been investigated differently or not, this is something that you just can't stand for. And if we allow this to continue, this is outrageous. I mean, this 100 and some guys you're going to see here died because of corruption.
The firefighters
on 9/11 were carrying precisely the same radio that had malfunctioned during the response to the 93 bombing at precisely the same location.
This is something that they knew from 1993. That in the Trade Center and in buildings that size, the radios just were not accurate.
I lost my son Jimmy on 9/11. From what I heard from people that survived that day, they saw him up around the 30th floor, and he never made it out. He never heard the call to get out.
I blame is totally on Rudy Giuliani. He knew they had a problem with those radios. Why did he do something about it?
Giuliani became mayor in '94, and he knew he had a report right in his hand that said that the radios did not work for communication in the World Trade Center, and that day was horrible in '93.
It was well documented that these radios didn't work, and the signal wasn't strong enough to communicate.
The other principal problem with the radios is that the fire department radios couldn't communicate with the police department radios. This is called interoperability.
What did Mr. Giuliani do from the beginning of his administration? He had 8 years. He did nothing to correct that situation. We had people dead as a result.
It gets worse.
After years of inaction, the Giuliani administration finally ordered new radios in 2001. Radios that were never field tested and obtained from Motorola in a no-bid contract.
Spring of 2001, brand new radios were introduced. They're introduced without any pilot testing.
They just ordered these radios on their own, they never field tested them, and they never did anything.
So not only did they take forever to deal with the radio problem, they made all the wrong decisions up the line in picking the radio that would be used.
These new radios were put in service, they lasted 1 week.
Within a week, the new inaccurate radios almost killed a firefighter. On his Mayday, went unheard that he was lost. So it took them 8 years to give us radios that had never been tested.
There was a lot of skullduggery, as I call it, that went on between Motorola and the city of New York.
The thing was that they've always bought only Motorola. They would never buy anybody else. There's no create enough obstacles, so it makes it, there's no way you can win it.
Why was everybody else closed out of bidding on this?
Motorola has a very overly close relationship with the communications people in the city. Far too close to any vendor I've ever seen. And it's not a good thing.
So here you have a contract that goes from $1.7 million to $14 million in a weekend. Things just don't add up.
The new radios had to be recalled as a result of their complete failure. Firefighters were reissued the old radios that malfunctioned in 1993. And on 9/11, the consequences would prove to be deadly.
It's documented that the police in the helicopter saw the towers leaning and knew the towers were ready to come down.
They're up in the sky, they're looking at the towers, they're predicting the partial collapse, at least of both towers, 10, 15 minutes before either tower collapsed.
They issued a vacate order, and who heard it was the cops.
And the police, got out of the area. That information was never relayed to us.
And see the cops was lost in the North Tower. Because they had heard the message.
121 firefighters in North Tower didn't have that option.
Their radios failed them, and that was Giuliani failing them.
Their willingness, the way I describe it, to stand their ground and not retreat. And the fact that so many of them interpreted it that way
kept a much calmer situation and a much better evacuation.
To say they heard the command to get out and didn't.
And disobeyed their orders. No.
It was such an unbelievable statement that our sons practically wanted to die. I know for sure that our son would definitely have come out, like he was just so livid, like he so wanted to live.
I didn't take the job to commit suicide.
The media is not digging in and trying to really find out about Motorola.
I want to know why Motorola got the contract when they could not provide the department with an adequate radio. And why they were given such an outrageous contract. That's what I want to know.
What was Rudy Giuliani doing for the last 7 years?
You have to ask yourself, did Rudy prepare?
What job did he do?
Why is there such a deep, deep concern for not finding the truth?
I want accountability.
It was everybody, but it was the people who depend on it.
So, pretty disturbing. They were given the order to evacuate. All the police officers did. A lot of the firefighters apparently did not hear it. And I know from our radios, we in the beginning had problems with what they call bonking, getting out to. We had to get new radios for that problem. There in New York, obviously, you see the I call it corruption, one big contract and multiplying that price by 10, and then not even field testing them. So, and I can speak as a firefighter, not for all of those guys, but if I consider myself an aggressive firefighter, but if I was in that building and there were multiple orders being given to evacuate the building, and the other one had already collapsed, and we were kind of fruitless at that point, I don't know many firefighters that would be standing there, standing their ground to keep people calm. They'd be doing everything they can to help them get out with them, but they're not. When we're given the order to evacuate, we get in a lot of trouble if we don't. So, ground zero atmospheres and the workers. This is kind of the aftermath of what's happening now to these workers. And most of you, I'm sure, have heard Christine Whitman. This is just a brief thing on Christine. She represented the EPA, but the documents actually came directly from the White House. They were told they blacked out a lot of the report of what was in the air. They were told what they couldn't say. So she should be held accountable, and so should the people above her. Here's what she said.
Getting the truth and protecting people are part of the EPA's mandate. But if the air at ground zero was safe, why were so many people getting sick? Even some of EPA's own staff doubted the agency's assurances about safety. Among them, senior policy analyst Hugh Kaufman.
Mrs. Whitman went on national TV, smiled at the camera, and told everybody everything was safe, and it wasn't.
As I say, you know asbestos was in there, is in those buildings, lead is in those buildings. There are the VOCs. However, the concentrations are such that they don't pose a health hazard. We're going to make sure everybody's safe.
So if they were really going to make sure everyone's safe, and the fire service we're pretty bullheaded. So there would be a lot of firefighters still, even if there was a safety equipment available, would not use it. But if it came from the top, like in our department, if they do a mandate, you have to wear your safety equipment, people do. So, if you're looking for your brothers, you're going to do things that you wouldn't normally do, but they should have been, after the rescue operation's over and they're working on the pile, they should have provided every piece of safety equipment they could. And here's the fall. One of the things we're doing here today, too, is raising money for the Field Good Foundation, which you're going to see here in just a second. And there's a lot of, the firefighters in New York are being covered for the most part from the city, but there's a lot of firefighters from other areas, and there's a lot of ground zero workers that were construction workers and that type of thing that are not being taken care of, and that's what we're here for, to help these guys out. So here's just one firefighter that has actually, because of time, I'm going to skip this.
My name is John McNamara.
John's a good guy, but I need to show you what the Field Good Foundation's about first. Health and Compensation Act. That's what the Field Good Foundation's demanding, and that's what we're demanding too. It's called the James Adroga 9/11 Health and Compensation Act of 2009 now. It's been around every year. Congress keeps refusing to pass this thing. It's named after a New York police detective who responded, whose death was among the first attributed to toxins. This bill continues to expand and improves the federal government's response to health effects of the terrorist attacks by providing long-term medical monitoring, treatment, compensation, research, and coordination. It reopens September 11th Victims' Compensation Fund for individuals who did not file before or became ill after the original December 22nd, 2003 deadline. So if you didn't register an illness by December 22nd, 2003, they're not being taken care of now under the Victims' Compensation Fund. So the other thing is, if they arrived on the pile, as you see the bottom one, it amends eligibility rules so that responders to 9/11 attacks who arrived later than the first 96 hours could be eligible. As of right now, if you arrive 96 hours later, which so many of the teams from around the country arrived 96 hours later, it took them days to get there, they're not being covered. And this is outrageous, and Congress still refuses to pass this thing. So this guy you're going to see here is John Field, and he's created a feel-good. He was a ground zero worker. He was injured, but because of all these guys who aren't being taken care of, he's created a foundation to help them out. And a lot of them, can't work now. They're not making their house payments, and the government, is not taking care of them. And they're just dependent on donations at this point. A lot of them, which is just unacceptable.
My name is David Miller. On September 11, 2001, along with hundreds of my fellow troops, I went to Ground Zero. No one asked us, no orders were given. We went because our city, our country, our neighbors were under attack. And we knew what to do, or at least we thought we did.
Anybody with half a brain would probably look at that cloud and say, this can't be good for you. But, unfortunately, when you're called to war, you don't say, well, I'm not going today, you just go.
But what exactly was in that burning pile where the World Trade Center once stood? According to final studies later published by the EPA and other government agencies, a devastating toxic soup containing more than 2,500 contaminants.
You see 2 110-story buildings collapse, and nothing more than small little pieces. Where did the asbestos go? Where did all the concrete bits go? Where did all the fireworks go? Where did all this go? And anybody could see that it went into the air.
You couldn't stop. You'd cough for like 5 minutes straight. You just couldn't stop coughing. You try to fight it back, and it would just come.
And this is the EpiPen that I carry. If I have an asthma attack and I'm not fighting on medication, I have to jab it into my thigh so I can get some relief.
I was sick immediately. I spent 3 days in Jamaica Hospital after 9/11 because I kept on having asthma attack after asthma attack.
We go out with rakes and shovels and stuff and just go through all the debris looking for, body parts and different things of that sort to make identification. The weird thing was it was very cold when we were up there. I believe it was in the middle of the winter, but the ground wasn't frozen. The ground kind of like bubbled underneath the feet, which was kind of strange too. That can't be healthy. You're coughing a lot. For the days after, we're coughing up blood and different things like that.
After 9/11, I developed a cough, nasal congestion, burning in my ears really bad, and I really never thought about it. I went to the doctors. I tried not to go out sick. And then I went on vacation in 2004 with my family, and I came back to my 40th birthday. They told me I had a mass in my chest. And I'm not crying for myself. I cry for my family because I'm worried about them being affected too.
We were all here 7 years ago, and the government turned their back on us. Please help us now. The federal government has still not assisted me and the thousands of other rescue workers. The federal government 2 weeks ago cut $100 million from the budgets for health care. And that is a disgrace. It's despicable that they would do that to us.
I have a much more limited lifespan, and so somewhere around 40,000 other rescue workers. But how many New Yorkers were also exposed? We had all that dust from the roofs done. This could be one of the greatest public health disasters in history.
Testified in front of Congress that the air was safe. Is that why, when I had a lung test 2 weeks ago, they found black fluid in my left lung? Is that why my right lung is full of blood right now? Is that why I take 18 medications, because the air was safe?
That's my roommate. That's his medication, 26 pills a day. He's an NYPD. I call him Skittles as a nickname, you know.
I have nasal problems. I have the asthma. I have nerve damage. I have sciatica. I have limited use of my left side.
My name is John Field. I'm a 9/11 responder. I was there for 5.5 days and I spent 11 weeks in the hospital. I thought I was horribly injured. Kept defending for my own basic benefits. Saw so many other people suffering, and I decided to help people just like me. Denied, neglected, turned down, laughed at, made a mockery of. Heroes, brave souls, who risked their lives on projects, who gave of themselves for this country and this city and New York. Over the last couple of years, I've been running the Feel Good Foundation. Feel Good Foundation, we advocate for workers' comp and social security on victims. We do this on limited resources. None of us here get paid. And what is made mostly of 9/11 responders. And we're trying to show others why we have nothing, we can still help each other. We can create that safety net and that support system for others to follow. Isn't there a better feeling in the world than helping somebody?
John Field donated his own kidney to another Boulder first responder who was about to die.
I thought giving the kidney was like, wow, what an honor. Actually, helping a 9/11 responder who can't put food on his table, keep you until beyond knowing that we help them do that, isn't it a better feeling? Isn't it a better feeling making the government look bad while they just keep spilling everything out?
We're sending the profits from that to the Feel Good Foundation. And that's part of what our petition's about too, is we're demanding the passage of the Health and Compensation Act. So really, all we're asking for, which is pretty simple, is a new investigation that follows national standards, nothing more, and the passage of the Health and Compensation Act to take care of these people that were there. 40% of the World Trade Center workers are being monitored by some Mount Sinai Hospital study lack health insurance. So 40% have no health insurance. A 2006 medical study of firefighters reported those personnel who inhaled ground zero air essentially lost 12 years of lung function. Additionally, a Mount Sinai report found that 70% of recovery and rescue workers reported an increase in debilitated respiratory function between 2002 and 2004. A 2008 report by New York City's Department of Health indicates that up to 70,000 people might have long-term health problems due to deaths. Over 500 already died from it. So there's a congressional belief. Again, Feel Good Foundation's doing the same thing we are, so demanding the passage of that thing. So what can you do? The big thing is signing our petition. Whether you're a firefighter or not, we're separating them on the website. We have about 170 non-firefighters and over 50 firefighters that are confirmed now. It's growing fast too. We're starting to get a lot more momentum. I'm going to start speaking more. I haven't been. And I'll be honest, a lot of people talked about the fear and stuff like that. In the very beginning, I was afraid. When I learned this information, and I'm not going to talk about a lot of what I've learned since from the by having started this website, I'm in touch with a lot of military, retired military, high-ranking generals, colonels, the Colonel Nelson that you saw, a CIA guy that 28 plus years, that have informed me about a lot of other things that are going on. We are in a desperate situation. We have to wake up. And we, I was afraid at the beginning. I still am occasionally. How can you not be when you start wrapping your brain around what this could possibly mean? Does it mean that? I don't know for sure. We need an investigation to find out if that's what it means. But in the meantime, we need to help out our brothers that that need help. Why this keeps doing this. So anyways, if you're afraid, it's okay. You just, we got to push forward. We got to rise up together and start demanding this investigation. I'm desperately asking firefighters to sign the petition, because as firefighters, the public trusts us, and we will have a huge impact. A lot of these military leaders are super excited that we're starting this group, because they know, if we get thousands of firefighters across the nation demanding a new investigation, it's going to have a major impact. So why aren't more firefighters speaking out? That's, I heard a question with Richard. Why aren't people saying in positions of power? I'm going to share this. This was on a public forum, so it's not violating anything. This, to me, is absolutely huge. And again, I didn't want to believe this. I did everything to aggressively defend it, the official story. This man, his name's George Wendt. I just met him on the forum a few days ago. I'm going to read to you his qualifications. He's the detective supervisor, retired from Morris County, New Jersey Prosecutor's Office, Arson Environmental Crime Team. He's a 22-year IAAI member, which is the International Association of Arson Investigators. He's presently the director of the International Association of Arson Directors. He is on the committees, currently Public Relations Committee. He's the chair, CFI Committee, which is Certified Fire Investigator Standards Committee, Health and Safety Committee, Bylaws Committee, Technology Committee. He is an instructor at the National Fire Academy. He's NFPA Technical Committee on Fire Investigator Professional Qualifications. He was there on 9/11. He watched the buildings come down. If there's anyone, I don't know if there's anyone more qualified than this man. So, what happened just back March 28th? That's George. This is George Wendt. That's the guy who's read the qualifications of. Never met him. I just got his picture offline from his website thing. So that's George. Firehouse Forums, like I said, is the largest firefighter magazine in the world. They have huge public forums. They have several 100,000 members. So they talk about all kinds of stuff on here. Well, I got an email from someone that, hey, who are you? What are you about? It's kind of a rude email, but I get those all the time. So I just said who I was, what I was about, gave my Mayday letter that I've written, and gave him the About Us page of the website. And said, thanks for asking. He's a firefighter. He identified himself as a firefighter. I said, we appreciate you signing the petition. Then he emails back a link to this forum. So I knew nothing about this forum and that this had started. So as you can see, it says Lieutenant Tony, and I don't know if that's the guy who emailed me or not. Does anyone know anything about this organization or the alleged firefighter who is behind it? Eric Lawyer, Seattle Fire 3 truck. Blah, blah, blah. I'm just going to read these because we're running out of time. One of the guys responded back. They said, well, I know some guys at Seattle Fire. I'll contact them and see if I can find out who this guy is. So this guy emails back. He contacted a Seattle firefighter. He says, my buddy tells me, great guy, one hell of a firefighter, but that shit has been drinking the conspiracy Kool-Aid from one of their officers. Not worth the effort here. Let this thread die. Now George pops in. George Wendt here comes in, and he says, nice try. That is a very elaborate and expensive website to put up and maintain. The content is highly inflammatory. It is difficult for me to understand how a guy could be influenced by his officer to go out and do this. And he thinks there's a tad more to the story. So then George quotes what I said from the website on NFPA 921, exotic accelerants, high order damage, etc. This is his response to that. NFPA 921 is not an outline for investigating a terrorism incident. It is a guideline for investigating fires and explosions. Well, it looked to me like we had fires and explosions that day. It would not be appropriate for this type of incident. Also, the definitions and sections cited are grossly taken out of context for self-serving reasons. These folks are flippant nut jobs. So then I come on. I finally get on. They delayed my post a couple days. I finally get it on. And I say, hello, my brothers. Here's my post. Hello, my brothers. I'm here to take some heat, respond to the questions, assumptions, and answer any questions anyone may have. I'm not here to name call, make it personal, or, quote, convince you. I'm here to raise awareness and challenge you to remove the emotion and really look at the evidence objectively. If anybody's interested, you can read my Mayday letter to see how I went, quote, cuckoo, and that's what they were calling me on the site. They had all kinds of name-calling and threats to me. For years, I believed the official story and I aggressively defended it. I read Popular Mechanics and watched all the specials that went over the cause of collapse. I refused to listen to my lieutenant who told me he was crazy, and I told him he was crazy and should leave the country. I really didn't listen to any of what I thought were the whack jobs, liberals, 9/11 twoofers, until a buddy of mine who was a West Point grad non-emotionally opened my eyes. Trust me, I know how you feel. I was there myself just 1 year ago. I didn't objectively look at the evidence until March 2008, and I wouldn't be doing this if I didn't think the survival of our country and our Constitution depends on us, quote, waking up and standing up together. You should check out patriotsquestion911.com to see how many high-ranking military officers, intelligence officers, etc. are saying the same thing. I personally know many of them now, and trust me when I say their patriotism and loyalty to the United States is solid, as is mine. When we have that many brothers who have been on the inside saying we have domestic enemies, I take it seriously because I took an oath years ago pledging I would defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. If you took that oath, you too should at the very least objectively inform yourself. As far as a franchise, one of them said we're franchises. They said firefighters, pilots, architects, we're all a big franchise being funded by some left group, some right group, or some terrorist group is what they said. As far as a franchise, no, that is not true. We came up with the name because of pilots and architects for 9/11 Truth. I and a few other firefighters built the site and funded it. We did not get any money from any political group, nor do I side with any political group now. As far as he promotes misinformation like Building 7 collapse with no structural damage, it's minuscule fire damage, blah, blah, blah. Well, that was actually from a post from Chief. I'm going to speed this up. So here's my question to him. As far as NFPA 921 is not an outline for investigating a terrorism incident, is there another national standards guideline for building fires due to terrorism that we are unaware of? Tower 7 was not struck by an aircraft. Plus, if you haven't read it yet, NFPA, and I didn't know who he was at the time when I said this. So I said NFPA 920, if you haven't read it yet. It turns out he's one of the ones who helped write it. If you haven't read it yet, NFPA 921 does mention terrorism, and honestly ask yourself, why NIST refused to test for explosives, even though the terrorists used them in 93, 118, blah, blah, blah. His answer to me was pretty shocking. I just heard myself, I fell off the chair laughing. This friggin' moron is lecturing me about NFPA 921. Me! You may not be here to name call and insult, but I am. You are a loser, pal. I challenge you to walk into any firehouse in New York City and spew this nonsense. Just make sure you leave good info, blah, blah, blah. I'm not getting all this bad stuff he said. So just so I fit in your model here, I was standing with several hundred other firefighters outside Manhattan Community College when Tower 7 fell. You were 100% completely, totally, positively wrong on every single count. So I asked him again, and he says, this is the response, there is no NFPA or national standard or any other standard for investigating a terrorist attack with fire involving aircraft. It was an unprecedented event. How could there be a manual for investigating it, you moron? And so again, I said, I'm not here to make it personal. Only legitimate question I have is for any fire investigator with all that history. I asked him 4 times, and he refused to answer this. So here's the one that really got me. Then several firefighters wrote in, backed me up, pretty big actually, it was pretty huge. You guys should go there, you can look at it, firehouseforums.com, and just go to the Firefighters for Knowledge and Truth and you'll see it. Anyways, I asked him again, with your impressive bio, you definitely are qualified to give us an honest and professional answer. As the founder of a group of firefighters demanding the passage of this, the Health and Compensation Act, and a new investigation, I am asking your professional opinion in this public forum. Would you please watch this clip I put together for you? I put together all the stuff you saw. And I said, as an investigator, if you had this type of witness testimony, would you test the debris for exotic accelerants? Can you give me any reason that follows national standards or any criminal codes that would explain why they would refuse to test? And then I said, also the terrorists may include, and I quoted NFP 921 and extremism terrorism. His answer is right here. That's his answer to me. Doesn't make any sense. A lot of anger. But I think he owes us an answer. He's not willing to give it. He won't give me any reason why he's not doing it. So thank you. The big thing will speak this. I'm almost out of time here. So what can you do? Again, like Richard said, a bunch of weak people. This is one of my favorites. A bunch of weak people, even in numbers, aren't strong. Get a whole bunch of confused people together. See how much clarity comes out of it. In other words, you just can't add one more confused person to the pot and expect to get any more clarity. One standing outside of the confused group who is clear is more powerful than a million who are confused. So what you can do then is inform yourself. That's number one. And it sounds like a lot of you here already have, but the ones who haven't, I strongly suggest that. If you too believe we deserve an investigation that follows the national standards, sign our petition. Support all the different groups. If you support the passage of the Health and Compensation Act, sign our petition. Inform others. Distribute our flyers to firehouses in your area. They've already been hit, but hit them again. Send our link to everybody you can. Join your local We Are Change. Get creative. Just do something. In our petition, I'm not going to go over one. Actually, I'm not going to do that one either. We're pretty much done. I just want to play a couple of quotes. These are the ones that actually, some of them are on my website. These are the ones that motivated me to take action. It's just a couple, 2 minutes. And this is to the music from Patriot, the movie. We need to stand up together. We need to get motivated. stop because we gotta get going on the movie. But anyways, thank you so much.
That's Eric Lawyer with Firefighters for 9/11 Truth. He came all the way out here from Seattle for this.